In the West, there is the debate about big government versus small government between the conservatives and the liberals. In China, the communist regime is the ultimate big government, and Beijing calls it its institutional advantage. Within a few weeks, we witnessed China's pandemic policy go from zeroing out COVID to letting COVID spread as fast as possible to create herd immunity. The CCP's 180-degree reversal of its COVID policy has caused more suffering than the virus itself. Beijing's institutional advantage has completely paralyzed the government and made its crisis management system dysfunctional. It caused a disaster 47 years ago, and it's still wreaking havoc today. Hello everyone, welcome to Leisrealtalk. I'm Lei. First of all, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Hope everyone's holiday season is great so far. After White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said that the United States was prepared to help China deal with ongoing waves of COVID if Beijing requests assistance, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin responded by saying that the Chinese Communist Party has institutional advantage to fight COVID. The CCP's institutional advantage is its centralized approach to everything: public health, wealth distribution, and even people's right to access information. The CCP believes that Western-style democracy is counterproductive as people's criticism of the government causes inefficiency. China, on the other hand, is most efficient because its government makes decisions for everyone so that the entire country can move in one direction. That's what the CCP leaders all believe. When China was isolated from the world before the 1980s, this belief hurt the Chinese people. After China adopted economic reforms and opened up, this belief still hurt everyone. We now worry whether China's latest explosive COVID outbreak will turn into a global economic and public health crisis again after 3 years into the pandemic. Let's compare a man-made disaster 47 years ago to China's disastrous COVID policy today in order to understand the CCP's institutional advantage. In May 2005, the Discovery Channel produced a program called The 10 Ultimate Technological Disasters. Ranking number 1 is not the Chernobyl nuclear power plant meltdown in the former Soviet Union, as you would expect, but China's Banqiao reservoir dam collapse. A little after midnight on August 8, 1975, the Banqiao reservoir in Henan province collapsed, sending a torrent of water gushing downstream, with shock waves similar to that of a small atomic bomb explosion. After that, a total of 62 large, medium, and small reservoirs collapsed successively in days, and millions of acres of land suddenly became an ocean of water. More than 10 million people lost their livelihoods. Over 18 million mu, or 2.9 million acres of farmland were lost. 6 million houses and 2,100 places along the riverbanks breached. 1 million farm animals were killed, and 102 kilometers or 65 miles of the Jingguang Railroad, a major artery from Beijing to Guangzhou, was washed away. Although 43,000 People's Liberation Army troops were deployed for disaster relief, 1.8 million people were still trapped by the water 6 days later. Dead humans and animal bodies were floating in the water, which led to the spread of various infectious diseases. Airdropped food packages fell into water and was unreachable by disaster relief workers. Epidemics and famine devastated the area. The CCP's official number of casualties was 26,000, but various other sources estimated that at least 100,000 people died in the flood, and another 140,000 lives were lost due to famine and diseases. I think the real number of casualties may be even higher. Some villages lost half of their people. According to the official record of Wencheng Commune in Suiping County, out of 36,000 people in the commune, more than half, or 18,000 people, died in the flood. The Banqiao Reservoir was built in the 1950s during Mao's Great Leap Forward movement. By the end of the 1950s, 9 large reservoirs and countless small and mid-sized reservoirs had been built in the upper reaches of the Huai River. At that time, a water conservancy expert named Chen Xin pointed out that the dams would cause serious damage to the environment and were dangerous. His warning was criticized and he was sent away for re-education. When the Banqiao Dam was first designed, it had 12 discharge gates. The main purpose of the reservoir was to retain water. At the time, retaining more water meant being more politically correct, whereas discharging water was politically incorrect. Therefore, the number of discharge gates was reduced to 7. When the dam was being built, the number of discharge gates was further reduced to 5. So the dam had less than half of the discharge capacity originally planned. During the Great Leap Forward, dam construction was a political campaign. Similarly, the recent zero-COVID policy also became a political campaign. Just like the zero-COVID policy, local officials constructed the Banqiao Dam by rejecting the opinions of scientists and engineers, and by being overly zealous in following the central leadership. But the ultimate collapse of the dam was caused by the lack of accountability and by highly centralized decision-making. Days before the dam collapse, a typhoon caused 3 heavy rainstorms that each lasted more than 10 hours. The heavy rainfall caused the water level of the reservoir to rise to a dangerous level. But local officials dare not open the discharge gates without the approval of higher authorities. On the day before the dam collapse, the reservoir authorities alerted the provincial government about the emergency. The provincial leaders notified one of the vice premiers, Zedong in Beijing. Xi went to talk to another vice premier, Leisrealtalk. The two decided to deploy the military, so they called Deng Xiaoping for help. Deng was the executive vice premier and also the vice chairman of the Central Military Commission. He was the one who had the power to intervene. At 10:45 p.m. that evening, Leisrealtalk called Deng's home. His daughter, Deng Rong, answered the phone and said that her father had already gone to sleep. Li explained the emergency and asked her to wake him up. Deng Rong insisted that her father was not feeling well and couldn't be bothered, and that they could wait until the morning. After midnight, local officials sent a second emergency telegram. They requested the Air Force to bomb the secondary dams to protect the main dam. After the request reached Leisrealtalk and Zedong again, the two called Deng's home again. Deng's daughter hung up on them. Li and Xi were upset but couldn't do much. So 40 minutes later, the water was so high that the dam was becoming flooded. The reservoir authorities sent a third emergency telegram. They eventually decided to open the 5 discharge gates, but they couldn't because the gates had never been opened and were rusted shut. By then, the reservoir had already begun to breach. It turned out, in fact, that Deng Xiaoping was not home asleep. He was playing mahjong at another CCP leader's home until 5 a.m. the next morning. While the flood ravaged the land, he was wide awake playing mahjong. From that chain of events, we can see, just like with the current COVID chaos, that no lower-ranking officials wanted to make decisions and be responsible. They relied on the marching orders from the higher-ups. The CCP's crisis management system is completely dysfunctional due to its highly centralized system and lack of accountability. It's as true as today as it was 47 years ago. You may wonder why Deng's daughter didn't tell the two vice premiers where her father was, so they could have reached him there. But the CCP's factional politics and relentless infighting have killed the basic trust among the leaders and their families. Deng's daughter was certainly not going to tell them that her father was out late playing mahjong. That piece of information could bring troubles later, a hard lesson that people learned during the Cultural Revolution. The infighting and factional warring have politicized Beijing's public health policy today. Lying was required then, and it still is now. No media outlets reported the disaster truthfully then, and likewise, they aren't truthful today. Deng Xiaoping knew he was responsible for the disaster, 6 years later, in August 1981, a reporter from the state mouthpiece Xinhua News Agency visited the disaster area and wrote an internal report asking the central government to offer financial help to the devastated region as people still lived in great hardship. Deng was furious and wrote on the report, "This is nonsense. This reporter should not be promoted." The reporter was immediately demoted to another job. Since then, no one dared to publicly talk about the 1975 dam tragedy until after Deng died. This above story was published in 2011 by a reporter named Shi Lei, who claimed that Ji Poming, the son of Vice Premier Ji Dengkui, told him. The junior Ji later denied being the source and wrote a long piece to defend Deng Xiaoping. I think his defense for Deng is more problematic. If Deng Xiaoping had known the emergency, that means all three vice premiers of China knew about the crisis but failed to mitigate it. If his father didn't call Deng, then his father was at fault. That just shows you the CCP's institutional advantage does not work. For me, I'd rather believe that Deng Xiaoping went playing mahjong and didn't know at all. Some China observers attribute China's current public health crisis to Xi Jinping's lack of ability or lack of a good plan. I think their view is rather superficial. Xi had a plan, it's just that his plan wouldn't work because of CCP's institutional advantage. It does not matter who you have as the CCP leader, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, or Xi Jinping. They're all the same because of the institutional advantage. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.